stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting.
When we share stories, whether in our personal or business lives, how we share them makes a difference in how we remember them and in how we're perceived by the people we're sharing them with. When you're listening to this podcast, I encourage you to listen and consider your own related stories. To listen and think about which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. And think about how you share those stories and the messages they carry for you and for the people who are hearing them.
Welcome to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. This is episode number 117, and I'm grateful to have a guest named Brynne Tillman. We've known each other on LinkedIn for probably 5 or 6 years, and this is our first time to actually have a real conversation, and I'm so excited to dig into your stories, Brynne. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sarah. I'm really looking forward to this.
Me too. So I would love for you to share a little bit about what you do so that our audience can get a little context for our conversation. And then after you say that, I would love to hear a little bit about something that most people might not know about you that wouldn't be on your LinkedIn profile or a bio. Also to give our listeners some context before we jump into personal stories.
Terrific. Thank you. I help people that are responsible for business development start more sales conversations by leveraging the power of LinkedIn and social selling.
Oh, well, that's pretty succinct.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, and something that I guess there are a few things that are not on my LinkedIn profile. The most fun one might be that in college I did stand-up comedy.
Oh my gosh. I love that. That definitely is something I did not know about you.
Yeah. So keep that kind of buried. And I'm doing improv now, which I'm absolutely in love with.
Oh, that, it doesn't surprise me really, knowing what I know about you just over the last few years and seeing some of your work. One of the things that I've always appreciated about your content is the humor behind it.
Oh, thank you. I try to keep things light, but also productive. So
yes,
it's a good combination in my mind.
It is. I think about that a lot, how to kind of ride that line between professionalism and warmth, and the line between practical and emotional. There's always a fine line there, and I find that really the audience, it's really dependent on the audience how far you can go on either side of those.
Right. Yeah. And especially in today's world, you have to make sure that you don't cross that line.
Right. So, there's so much sensitivity. And sometimes I just think, okay, there's too much sensitivity really. And so I lean toward the choice to say, if you're not my audience, that's okay.
Yeah, a lot of people do that, and I certainly, in my personal side, feel I'm much more expressive in my opinions, like on Facebook and in other places. But they do try to keep it as neutral as possible on LinkedIn and and even in both places, post with empathy, thinking about what is it that my reader is going to see, and although. I think we all come from different places and it's hard to judge. I feel like I don't want to judge their reaction to what I put out. It's my job for me to vet it first and look at it from all angles before I hit post.
Yep, that makes total sense to me. One of the things I think about as I read for tone right before I hit that submit or post button is I read it for the tone in terms of, what do I want them to get out of this? Because if I insult somebody, if I'm insensitive to somebody, then they're not going to get the benefit of the message that I'm trying to share.
I love that. I never think of that as I read it for tone, but I think that's so important because what we're saying doesn't always sound like what it sounded like in our head, when we put it out there.
So many times.
Right? Yeah. So I love that. Yeah.
Oh, yes. So I kind of want to, because this whole episode, the theme is those pivot points in your life that really shift who you are and how you see your place in the world. I'd really like to dive a little bit into your stand-up comedy experience. Was in college?
It was.
And where did you go to school?
I went to a school called Johnson and Wales in Providence, Rhode Island, and it was a restaurant, hotel, and culinary arts school. Because I worked at Friendly's in high school and loved it, so I thought that's what my career should be.
Hospitality.
Hospitality, yeah. But then, I graduated. I had a daughter when I was very young and realized this is a terrible life for a family, so I went into sales.
Well, let's dig a little into that. Stand-up comedy. What made you decide to do that? Did somebody dare you?
No, actually, freshman year I took a public speaking class, and it was our final was our whole class went to an amateur night at a local club called Periwinkles in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm curious if it still exists, probably not. But Thursday nights, it was like open mic night, and that was our final. And the guy that ran the Friday, Saturday, Sunday night shows asked me to come back, which was really fun. So I did that for a little bit, and I went on for a couple of years, not consistently every weekend, but I had my shtick. I had a friend that helped me write my shtick, and it was really fun for a while. And I even got paid for a couple of gigs, so I could say I was a professional comedian.
Wow! So you're our current Mrs. Maisel, is who you are.
Yeah, no, which I love that show, but I don't think she's funny. I want to rewrite all her stuff. I listened to her stand up. I'm like, oh, she missed it. That's my. I do that with Saturday Night Live too. I'm like, oh my gosh, I could write this. They just missed by an inch. But that's me.
Rhyming or tone, right?
Yeah, or just like it's almost funny. I still love the show, but I think she's almost funny.
Oh, that's almost funny. That should be the name of your book. Almost funny.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh gosh. So I'm imagining you that first time on the stage for your public speaking thing. And I'm imagining you standing up there, not really feeling nervous because you were excited. And I could just imagine this. You don't seem to me that you would have been nervous.
Weirdly, I was not nervous, and I expected to be nervous. And I thought it was strange that I wasn't nervous. And what I found is it fed me. It energized me. So, they talk about an introvert versus an extrovert, and, an introvert is exhausted at the end. For me, it gives me energy. And so that was really the first time I ever, outside of a little bit of school play when in elementary school, where I was ever in front of an audience where everyone was looking at me and listening to me. And yeah, that was certainly a pivotal moment for sure.
So do you think you knew at that, when you stepped off the stage, that was a pivot point, or was it later on when you look back?
I'm not sure I knew it was a pivot point till this conversation right now. So I don't know. Yeah, in looking at it, I guess, I ended up going into sales, not into drama or even public speaking or training immediately. However, my first real job was at Dun & Bradstreet, and I was performing exceptionally well. And at the age of 22, they were pulling me into groups to teach my peers what I was doing to sell, right? Like, how was I upselling? And so I had this combination of loving to be in front of an audience, but also training. So I think that was the moment I always looked at as my pivotal moment in my career, was when they're like, we're listening to your calls, you're talking with these people, and you're upselling in a way that they feel grateful. We need to, and I was young, and I was just bored in an inbound call center, right? So I was just having conversations with people.
Right.
but at 22, I was brought into, and I ended up teaching hundreds of people in 2 different locations. My technique, which is really just talk to people and find out what they need,
Right.
and solve their problem. So every sales job, almost every sales job I ever had after that, I ended up training. I was
Mhm.
people would ride with me. People, it just always ended up in that way. So moving into a sales training position, and now teaching LinkedIn for sales just was a natural progression. And now I get to do keynotes and get in front of huge groups, excited about there's a big outbound conference coming up, and being on the big stage in front of thousands of people is going to be a whole lot of fun.
Mhm. When is that?
May 5th through 8th.
Oh, so we'll cross our fingers that actually happens.
Yep, currently it's still on the books, but if for any reason things change, I'm sure it will just be pushed out a little bit. But right now, we're good to go.
Okay, well, I'll keep that in my thoughts that that's going
Thank
to
you.
be the end of all of this, and we'll be able to come back to being social again,
It would be great. Yeah.
face-to-face social again. So I'm really curious about this as I imagine you coming off the stage of that very first open mic night, stepping off the stage, and was it immediately that the manager came up to you, or was it when the group was kind of filtering out, or?
Yeah, no, it was definitely afterwards. But I'm old now. It's been a long time. I was 17 at the time, and I'm 50. So it's hard to remember exactly what happened. I don't even remember his name, but I do remember what he looked like, and I remember his act. It was very Michael Jackson oriented at the time. This is
Of course.
my memory, right?
Right, because it was the late
Yeah.
80s. I get it. Uh-huh.
Yeah. It was 1986.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe into 87. It was the school year of 86, 87. And I don't exactly even remember the conversation. I just know originally he said, come back to next Thursday's open mic night. So I actually did a few open mic nights before I was asked for the Friday or Saturday, but he did encourage me to come back. And he also gave me some input on how to kind of engage the audience a little better, how to make better eye contact. Like, he gave me a couple of pointers. So I guess all of that I've used over the years.
Mm-hmm. Well, think about it that way. When you look back, you can visualize what he looked like.
I can, yeah.
You remember details about the conversation, even if you can't like visualize the whole thing. You were clearly remembering details of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'm asking you to go back to that because you can apply it to everything that's come after that. Everything.
Yeah, I got to go find this guy, right? Like,
yeah. Well, seriously, I'm a big believer in uncovering those experiences, because what it does is there are 2 things that it does for us. One is it helps you understand your internal messages a little bit more, because I guarantee your internal messages shifted immediately when he came up to you. When he went to you and not to any of the other students.
Oh, there's one
said,
okay, but that's okay.
Still,
no,
I mean,
the 2 of us
probably unusual, right?
Probably, yeah. But we had a really good communications teacher too that really helped us to hone the script. And I mean, I think overall it was a great experience. But yeah, it was great, and it did feel good, and I was thrilled to come back.
Yeah. So this guy comes up to you and another person and basically pulls you from the group and says, "You're funny."
Yeah. Yeah.
When you think about that moment, especially because you weren't nervous, but you had that confidence that you could do it. So the reason this is so important to me to kind of dig down into these details is that when you think about what happened and that man coming up to you and building your confidence, which you already weren't nervous, but to have him come up to you and say, "You're funny. Like, I want to see you back here," probably shifted something in your head. Like, oh, I could actually do this. This could be something that I incorporate somehow into my life. Even if you're not thinking long term, you're thinking, sure, I'll come back next week.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I did shift something. I was never the best student. I always thought I was smart, but no one else ever did. Like I thought, I think I'm clever. I think, but my academics never really showed that I was, which is why I went to culinary school and restaurant management, because I was a good waitress, right? Like I
Right.
like to cook, right? Like but I wasn't great at school. And actually I ended up really excelling in college. So, which I got very lucky, but this was an early on where I thought there was a moment of I'm good at something. And
Yes.
so that was, yeah,
Yes.
that was good.
And so when I dig into these stories and we're figuring out what internal messages were developed and given up because they weren't serving you anymore in that time period, it's not like an overnight thing. I don't believe in a light switch going on. I do believe in dimmer switches. So
Slowly
exactly.
moving
So
up.
some subconscious shifts were going on because that's what happens in that transitional, transformative period in our lives between 17 and 23 or so. But that, it seems like sometimes it would get brighter and brighter. And in this case, being able to look back at those moments not only helps you understand where those internal messages started to shift, but it also, when other people hear these stories, it can either help them shift their internal messages and say, oh, I didn't look at it that way. But if I do, then that changes how I do what I do.
Yes.
And it also can help people who haven't had those ideal situations where somebody tells them they're good at something. They can look back and actually find them because their memories are jogged from hearing your story.
I love that.
Yeah, well, it's huge. It really is transformative when you share a story like that, not just for you, but for the people who are listening to it.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel great. I love that. It's
Good.
yeah.
Excellent. So let's fast forward, and Dun and Bradstreet, they overhear your conversations because they're recorded. This call may be recorded or monitored for customer service purposes.
Yep.
And I'm imagining you getting called into an office. And was it just one person that talked to you, or
It was actually interesting. I love what you're imagining, because like this is 2 times it's pretty spot on. So I think it's interesting. Your intuition is amazing. There was actually very early on a call that came in for a woman that was very excited about a sale that she just made to Macy's. And she was a small clothing textile company. It was a textile company out of like North Jersey and like Jersey City, Hoboken area. And she was so excited because this was the biggest sale of her entire life. And so for the records, they needed a Dun & Bradstreet report, but she laughed. It's Macy's, that's fine. Well, when I looked at this report, I saw, because I could see that they paid textiles in 180 days. So it's a really long time to get paid. And I'm listening to this woman.
Yeah.
So I said to her, I said, there is another report that I'd recommend that you purchase. It was like, I don't know, 25, 30 bucks at the time, which is, and because you're going to start to see that there's some slow pay, and and this was all the training they gave us, but you may want to consider getting like a bridge loan, because you could go under. I was taught this,
Before
so
they
now I
pay
have this
you,
conversation
right?
before they pay you. So she bought the extra report, and then months later, and that was like in the first couple of weeks of me working there, but months later, like a very high level executive came down, looked at me in my little cube, and there's a whole bunch of us, and walked into my boss's office. I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? I'm such a big mouth. Like, what did I say? Who did I insult? I don't know, right? And then they call me in, and they show me this letter that thanked Dun & Bradstreet and me for saving her company, because she was able to get this bridge loan, and they pulled the call and all that fun stuff. So at that point, they're like, we need more of this, right? And so and it's really solution selling. It's just listening and asking, and it all stemmed from me asking, like, this is exciting. You're pulling a Macy's. Did you get a deal? Like, I asked the question, ultimately giving advice and information. So that was a real pivotal moment for me too. I was just bored. Like, I couldn't just take orders, and that's what I was. My first job was an order taker, and I really became a solution seller. And so, they asked me, how do I do things? And I ended up working with my manager's manager, was the trainer, and we came up with a program. And I was at the time in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and we had a call center there and one in Houston, Texas. And so I was able to develop a training for the call centers, and that was really cool.
Yeah. So there are two things that popped into my head as you're telling me that story. One is when you said, I was just asking questions, I was just providing solutions, but that's not all that common. And the fact that up until college, your academics were nothing to be excited about.
Yeah.
What that says to me is that when you were going through the training to be in the call center, you were listening.
Mm-hmm.
You were actually paying attention to the services that Dun & Bradstreet provides when they were telling you, this is what we do. This is the service that we provide for our clients. This is how to upsell because we have these products that are really
they didn't ever teach upsell. That was the interesting thing. It was just, here's our list of products, and this is why people buy them. But there was we were order takers. I created a sales department out of this inbound order taking. It was not a sales role initially.
Right.
So yeah.
It's not just, I was just listening. I was just asking the right questions.
I was just bored, and I wanted to have conversations.
So there's so the first thing is, it's not just anything, because the reality is that you had to know those products well enough to be able to suggest it to her. So even if, you had to know the products.
That's true. Yeah.
And that means
the consequences. I understood the consequences in credit decisions that people were making
without being told what the consequences would be.
So I think the training, the product training was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very good at explaining the consequence, like why this product exists. The payment analysis report was the product that I sold, right? There was there's BIRs, business information reports, and financial reports, but this was a payment analysis. I remember it well. I was there for a long time. It really broke down how they pay. And I just remember in training them saying, and people use these to get bridge loans when people pay slow. So that was like a one-liner in a training class on onboarding that stuck with me. And I realized, and so that I was able to retrieve that at the right moment.
Right. But other people don't always put those things together. And what I'm saying is that was a unique gift. A gift is the wrong word because you work for it. But that's a unique talent that you have. And the fact that you, and I don't think it's just a random talent. I think where it came from was concern for the person on the phone. You actually had care for every person that called. Because if you don't care, you don't think about the connections and the reasons she might need this other product. And that's the difference. That's the talent. That's the unique quality that you brought. And then add to that, you're welcome. Absolutely. But add to that the fact that because you were bored, you could have laid low. You could have just provided the very basic of service that everyone else was providing because you were bored. And this is something I had a conversation with for another podcast episode. I'm trying to remember who it was, but we talked about the fact that, it was with Ash Rao that I just interviewed a few weeks ago in February. We talked about the fact that you are always an ambassador for yourself.
That's good. I like that.
it doesn't matter what position you're in, whether you're making sandwiches at Friendly's or standing up in front of people to do your public speaking final at a comedy show, or whether you are bored out of your mind answering calls and taking orders at Dun& Bradstreet. When you care enough to do a good job, you represent yourself well, which means somebody's going to notice. And it may be just this woman who is just starting out in her business and super excited to get Macy's, which that would have been enough for you to be recognized by her for her saying, I really appreciate you. But that she wasn't the last stop in that ambassador train that you took on, that you left the station. She wrote that letter, and then it came back to you months later through this upper management person that came down and made you so nervous by looking in and looking at you and
that made me
visualizing
nervous.
that. Yes. So that was the other thing that I was visualizing. You step up on stage, 17 years old, and do your final for a public speaking course without any nerves. But some guy in a suit comes down to your cube, takes one look at you, and I could imagine you blushing, like this furious warmth coming up through your chest and going, oh shit, what did I do?
Oh,
totally do that.
Yeah. I mean, so it's funny because, my Achilles heel is wanting everyone to love me. So that's part of like loving to be on the stage too. Right. So
right.
It may be a talent, but it's also feeds into this, the anxiety is what if, and I don't have it when I'm on stage, right? Because I know I can feed the audience. Like I feel good about, but letting someone down or disappointing someone or someone not being happy with me is the piece that like hurts, right? So that's, so the fear of the anxiety of someone walking down and looking at me with the unknown. And I also have boundary issues, right? Like I'll talk to anyone about anything. I sometimes like will cross a boundary. And so I'm like, did I say something? I just never know. What did I cross? Right.
Right. So. Yeah. You're preaching to the choir, my friend.
Yeah.
I sometimes have that internal editor turned way, way down when it should be turned up. So I get that.
Yeah. That's why I'm self-employed, because I would be a human resource nightmare.
So I could just imagine that nervousness sitting in your cube. The other people that were sitting near you, did they see that interaction?
I remember standing up. And the guy that was his name was Terry. I don't remember much more, but I remember standing going, I think I'm in trouble. Like this may be my last day kind of conversations. Like, what are you talking about? And and they called me over. So I do remember, but we were like in this cube of like 4 people, and I would stand up a lot because I couldn't sit the whole time. So I happened to have made, and the way my cube was facing, sitting down, I could even see my boss's office, but we were like in a cube of 4. So I was really the only one that had that view when I think about that. But I did pop up to let Terry know that, he may never see me again. I think I'm in trouble.
Did he laugh or did he have some compassion or?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
Isn't that funny? I don't, yeah. I mean, I could, yeah, there are certain, like, it's like an old movie. Like, I don't even feel the emotion of it anymore. It's just sort of like, well, now I'm talking about it. I'm reliving it a little bit, but my memory is spotty.
Yes. Well, of course. It should be. But that's useful. That's a useful thing to have your memory be a little spotty. I just like to kind of get the details down as much as you remember so that we can kind of create a mental picture for people who are listening. I just find that
so he laughed at me. That's a good.
Yeah, we'll go with pretend that you remember.
He was a funny guy. I enjoyed
it's funny
him.
Because and at some point, these memories are actually going to come back to you, like over the next 24, 48 hours. You're going to have snippets of visual images, visual memories pop back into your head of this time in your life. And this is fun. This is great. And it's also part of your story. So, that whole book, Almost Funny, it's like already coming up into my head what your book is going to look like.
That's so
Almost Funny.
I love that. I think there's an Almost Famous, so Almost Funny works.
Yeah, I like it. Wow. I'm just visualizing all these little stories, these snippets of your stories. And
I love the way your brain works. I love it. I do. This is the first interview I've ever had with someone that's gone in this direction, and it's so fun. So
well, good. I'm glad to hear that. So let's kind of wind back into one last story before we wrap this up. When you decided to be self-employed, mm-hmm. and I don't know how that happened, or whether that was an oops, I guess I'll be self-employed, or whether it was I'm ready. But when you started your business in its current iteration, mm-hmm. do you remember a moment where you put it all together, where you went, oh yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, tell me.
So I do. Well, I was a partner in a sales training company, and I was teaching this LinkedIn thing as this loss leader. Like people, so my company launched about 6.5 years ago. Before that, I was teaching this as this like little piece of a sales training company. And we were bringing in, we had public classes, I don't know, maybe $99 for a half day class once a month. And we had we filled up with 40 people every single month and wait lists for the next month.
Wow.
Everybody wanted to learn this thing. And I got a local reputation of doing this great thing. And so we were teaching people how to leverage LinkedIn for more client referrals, for networking opportunities. It was very similar. It was a little bit of a different platform then, but similar philosophy. And then they would buy our program, which was cold calling. And I was like, I feel really like it was a traditional, like kind of just your traditional, like, overcoming objections, cold calling, feel, felt, found, right? Like that all those traditional kind of over-taught sales tactics, which, that's what we did. We were a sales training company. Mm-hmm. And I was really feeling uncomfortable. Like I had this magic thing, and it wasn't the core of what we were teaching them. And we weren't teaching how to use this to build relationships beyond this half-day class that, was about filling in it to get them on our list and sell them into bigger programs. And so I, approached my partner at the time, and I said, I really only want to do this. And she's like, that's not who we are. So we parted. She's wonderful. We're good friends. Her business is incredibly successful doing her thing. And I just said, you know what? This is all I want to do, because it's at the core of who I am, is about leveraging relationships for client referrals, networking introductions, and permission to name drop in order to get in front of people at a higher level of credibility and create more conversations at the very top of the pipeline. Now, since then, we do a lot of nurturing throughout the sales process. We talk a lot about how do you create value-centric, resourceful content so that you're leading to your solution, not with your solution. We're not pitching. So it's become a much bigger program over time. But I realized that this was a huge gap in the sales training world, and mm-hmm. I wanted to be the one to fill it.
Wow. So when was it with a first client, or what was it that that the light bulb went on that you were absolutely doing what you were meant to be doing?
So I think that was a dimmer switch. Like, I think mm-hmm. it was a little bit over time. Uh-huh. I think the public classes over about a year and a half was where I got really good at them. I knew my shtick. I knew when I get the eye roll and when I get the laugh. It was all it was Broadway show,
Right.
right? Like there's my showmanship,
Right.
and I loved it, and I didn't love anything else
Okay.
that I was doing, right? That's all. And I think the aha moment over, like I would go and teach another sales training class on, discovery calls, or overcoming objections would make me crazy, and all the ways to do that. The Columbo close,
Ugh.
and I was like, all I want to
So
do.
academic.
Well, it's so commonplace too. Like I
Right.
was not amazing at that. I was good, but everyone that teaches that is good. Like Sandler training, if you know anything about that sales training, like there's a lot of very similar stuff. And I wanted to shine. I wanted to be, I think part of like my not academic world is I'm dyslexic and I never got these good grades. And I think there was a piece of me that always wanted to be the best in the world at something. And I felt like I could be the best in the world at this. Like I'm sure I'm one of maybe 100 that are the best in the world, but that's a pretty good number, right? Like to be in the top 100. And I think I could be in LinkedIn for sales, right? And I've made lists in the top one. I've, in some lists.
Right.
So it is the world I play in. And I think I'm exceptionally good at this little teeny tiny piece. And of the world. It's like my little indent.
So you were a LinkedIn top voice. What year was that? It was
I wasn't a LinkedIn top voice. I was a top influencer, and I think it was 2016. It was a little bit different. I think it was 2016. Could be.
That's right.
15 or 16, and I was a number one top influencer.
I remember seeing that and going, "Oh my gosh, I'm in her network," and being so excited.
Thank you. That was like this amazing moment. Now, the funny story is, it was at a huge event. I forget where it was. It might have been in San Francisco. I think it was in San Francisco. And I had left the main room to have a conversation with a client that happened to have been there, and they didn't know Valerie. Hello, Valerie. And so we left, and they made this announcement, and I wasn't in the room for it. So I had all these people coming out and congratulating me, and I missed the moment. But that's okay. It was still awesome.
For someone who likes to be in the spotlight,
I know. It's okay. It was funny.
That is really funny. Oh, to be a fly on the wall, to see that experience would have been hilarious. Well, see, that's in your book. There it is.
Yeah, almost funny.
Almost funny. Yeah.
I actually have other books in my head, but almost funny is a fun one.
Yeah. Well, I before I finished the first draft of my book, I still have 2 or 3 others that are kind of in the wings, waiting for me to come back to them, that I've either written out outlines or have actually started the introduction or the chapter headings or whatever. I have at least 3 going at any given time. So
wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have a book published now?
No, it's actually going to be published. It should be out in May. It's
how
in
wonderful.
the hands of an editor right now. They're doing the creative work. I'm working with a publisher called Kohler Books out in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Nice.
Yes, I'm very excited for it. It's taken me a long time. Like I said, I've always had some books waiting to be written somewhere. And this is the first time I actually finished one.
That's awesome. Congratulations. I've had a few books out, all on LinkedIn and social selling. I have the LinkedIn Sales Playbook, which, I'm always wanting to improve it, but there are a couple personal ones I want to do someday. But right now I'm focused in the business world.
Of course. That makes sense. I mean, there's such a limited amount of time you can spend on those things, and writing a book is no small feat. So I applaud you for the books that you've already completed.
Thank you.
Pretty impressive and exciting.
I appreciate that.
Well, for our listeners, I will have a link to Brynne Tillman's website and also to her Amazon book.
Oh, thank you.
Links so that you can look at what she's done so far. And please, listeners, if you have questions, reach out to her, because I'm sure she would love to hear from you.
Connect with me.
Connect with her if you haven't run out of connections, because I know LinkedIn sometimes
Yeah,
mark
I have
that
a
off.
lot more followers than connections. So
Okay,
it
good,
looks
good.
like I'm in like the 50,000 range, but my connections are not that many.
Ah,
So,
good. That's
so
good to hear.
yeah, yeah. But I'm fortunate to have a ton of followers, so I'm very lucky.
Yes, yes. Well, luck has very little to do with it, but we'll just go with that.
Thank you.
Well, so our listeners, you feel free to connect with Brynne, but make sure you write a personal connection request,
Yes.
as her books will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely the best way to stand out and be a good ambassador for yourself and for your company. So please pay attention to those little details because they matter. It's all about building relationships. And Brynne, I'm so grateful for this relationship and for finally connecting face to face with you via Zoom.
Thank you. This has been wonderful, and I'm thrilled to get to know you better and better.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. If you're planning an event or company retreat and want to bring in a memorable, entertaining, and highly practical speaker as your keynote speaker or workshop facilitator, please visit us at elkinsconsulting.com to learn how we can help and provide a memorable keynote or breakout session. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?